Hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Team Needham Abode podcast studio. And we are super excited to have Sean Casey back on our show again. And if you recognize his name, there's a reason, because I think he's been on, I don't know, this might be his fifth or sixth time. He may have been on more than any other guest. And yes, if you remember, he was on just a few weeks ago talking about how eating healthy does not have to be expensive. And the reason we have him on so much is because he is such a wealth of knowledge. So super excited to have him on today to be talking about the importance of VO2 Max and how to increase your VO2 Max. So Sean, welcome back to our show.
Hey, well, it's a privilege to be back on it. I always enjoy talking with you, Janet, as well as Sean. So many great discussions and so many ways we can help people live healthier, active lives.
That's right. So we were super excited when we were at a conference in San Antonio over the weekend, and it was just a hormone and health and wellness conference in general, optimal health, basically. And one of the things the opening speakers talked about was the importance of VO2 Max. And I've talked about this on my show before, talked about it to many people on social media also. VO2 Max is basically the volume, maximum volume you can deliver oxygen. I'm going to let you go into the details of that just shortly. But Dr. Peter Attia actually talked about how the VO2 Max is actually an important indicator of overall health and longevity. So I think it's very important. And tell us how you define VO2 Max. You already kind of did it to me, which is a quick explanation beforehand. So tell us how you define VO2 Max.
Kind of the fancy science version of it is how much oxygen your body can use to fuel what it's doing. But on more of a larger 10,000 foot scale I look at VO2 Max basically as a sign of how well is your lungs, your heart, and your blood vessels working together to deliver oxygen to your limbs, to your muscles, to the places that they need to be going. So that's what it is, kind of how well your cells are taking up the oxygen that's being delivered.
Right. That's exactly right. So why would it be a good overall indicator of health? Because if you have a healthy heart, you have healthy lungs, and you have healthy blood vessels, you're going to be delivering nutrients, blood, all that kind of stuff to your periphery, which means that you're probably overall healthy. When you think about what happens with a stroke or what happens with a cardiovascular accident, heart attack, there's a blood clot that stops you from delivering blood to those extremities. So that's why I do believe that VO2 Max is a good overall indicator of general health.
No, absolutely. And VO2 is something, I think on all ranges of the spectrum. So, I mean, delivering blood is key, whether you're, a high level athlete or, even kind of we were talking about earlier is, with diabetics, we know that one of the end stage results of that is neuropathy, loss of amputate or limbs. And how I always explain to people is one of the things that happens in those conditions is you're not delivering blood to those right areas. So the nerves start to break down. So, I mean, that is one of the cool things is, although it usually gets talked more about on the athletics, I'm glad, as you alluded to earlier, people like Dr. Peter Attia and others are talking about no, this is not just an athlete thing. This is correlated with health and wellness across the spectrum.
And so tell us what you know about increasing your VO2 Max. What would you say is one of the best ways?
There are so many ways that you can go about increasing your VO2 Max. And I think often when people think about, okay, VO2, that's endurance training. I need to be doing long endurance training for hours on end to have any sort of effect on it. And it's actually really fascinating. There's been a lot of science coming out showing it doesn't have to be necessarily 2 hours on a bike consistently. You can do almost high intensity interval training to increase your VO2 max. And I remember even coming across this interesting study done in Scandinavia, one of the Scandinavian countries, that showed they had a group who kind of did the steady state cardio. They had ones that did, and I think that was about 70% of heart rate max. And then they had a few other groups, and they had about 4 groups along the spectrum. And the group that had the strongest increase in their VO2 was actually the group that was doing high intensity interval training. They had one group that did like 15 seconds hard and then 15-second rest. So they kind of kept on bouncing through there, did awesome job. And then the other group, and I think this is an easy one for people who only have, say, 30 minutes they can spend in, maybe a gym setting, is they found if they did 4 minutes at a higher intensity, 4 minutes relatively relaxed, and then they repeated that 4 times, that group also saw a huge increase in their VO2 max. So that's what I always tell people, is incorporating the different ends of the spectrum can really help.
Yeah, and that's basically what we learned at the conference, was that you don't have to do long hours of endurance to increase your VO2 max. Although one of the things, and this is important because you know this all the time, is that you have to start where you're at. So if somebody is just getting off the couch, then increasing their VO2 max is going to be fairly easy. Just get them moving, and that might just be walking briskly for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So tell us about the importance of heart rate monitoring. And you talked about 70% of maximum heart rate. What's a good, easy way to find your maximum heart rate?
The easiest one to do to get your heart rate is, there's a simple equation. I forget the exact fancy name for it, but basically if you take 220 and minus your age on that, that gives you a good approximation of what your maximal heart rate can be. And the reason I really like heart rate is, if you have one of the monitors, awesome, that works great, but heart rate's something that you're able to take on yourself relatively easy, as well, either on your neck or if you're doing it on your wrist. So I find for a lot of people that I'm working with, it's an easy monitor on things. The other one that I'll sometimes do to help people kind of gauge intensity is, especially depending on where they're starting out, is I'll make it, simple. Like, hey, this is an intensity. I almost break into 3 different buckets. This is an intensity I can do forever, have an easy conversation, no issues whatsoever. And then I have like the middle buckets, kind of like, I can have a conversation, but I'm not necessarily going to be completing my sentences. I made it take a slight break, there. And then the third intensity is like, there's no way in HE double hockey sticks that I'm going to be having a conversation, at this level. And so sometimes if I'm trying to go
at that high level, it's one of those things. If you talk to me, I might yell something back at you very, very mean.
There may be a fist flying.
Yes, right.
I'm on there. And so that's what I always like, is kind of breaking down those intensities. And, I'm building what you said off earlier, and you made an excellent point of, you always have to start at that level that's comfortable, and something is better than nothing. And so when I'm starting with a lot of people who are just kind of getting back into it, they're relatively sedentary, you want to build confidence, you want to hit those milestones. And so I'll usually do just what you just said right there, is like, hey, let's do a 5-minute walk one time a day. Okay, check mark, we're doing good there. All right, let's now build that to 2 5-minute walks, or you can kind of play around with those to build that base. So if we can kind of get the floor more broad while raising the ceiling, now we have that broader base, and we can then go towards those higher things as our fitness level allows for.
Absolutely. So Janet, what kind of comments or questions do you have for Shawn?
Well, so one of the things that we kind of learned too at this conference is that rather than saying I'm going to have a food snack, let's have an exercise snack, which I loved. Because that really is like getting up and even moving from your desk for a few minutes, every so often adds up over time. It's just making that blood flow move. So being conscious of, it doesn't have to be like you're at the gym. You could take your 10-minute break and use that for moving and do that in the day.
And there's really no reason you couldn't do a quick, like a 1 minute, even at work, if you've got comfortable enough clothes, a quick 1 minute hit session at work, just jogging. Sprint in place for a minute, if that's all you could, or do a minute of burpees. A minute of burpees at a higher intensity, and it's going to get your heart rate up to, maybe 80 to 90% of your maximum. If you do them really hard, do mountain climber, something like that.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get sweaty enough where you're going to need to go get a shower and change your clothes. So that's what we learned in the conference, is that is effective, especially for people that, are fairly sedentary.
One of the circuits, you just kind of popped a light bulb, I like to do with people during the workday to break it up is 10 body weight squats, 10, there's something called like a glute bridge, where you're basically kind of just putting your hips up in the air, 10 of those. And then, depending on your strength levels, 10 wall push-ups or 10 push-ups off a desk or a thing. And you can literally go through that circuit about 3 times in roughly, 1 to 3 minutes.
Yep.
And again, you're just getting your body moving. And the other thing that I always think about, and I love how you put that, Janet and Shawn, is like, make sure you're moving through the day. One of the things I find with a lot of the clients I work with is they'll do maybe a fitness session of, 20, 30 minutes or an hour, whatever that time length is. And they'll do that maybe first thing in the morning. And then for the next 9 hours of the day, they're sitting at a desk, not moving at all. And it's really fascinating when you're looking at the research is, I almost feel from a health longevity standpoint, doing consistent movement through the day as much, if not more, health benefits than that 30 minutes, hard and then not doing anything for the rest of the day, type deal. And, I was thinking about from an evolutionary standpoint, before everything was automatic and everything was a click of the button was, you were getting up and moving throughout the day, as opposed to, I don't know, many cavemen are like, we're going to do really high intensity session now and then chill for the rest, it's the lifestyle. Right. So it's so fascinating. So, I love the points that you're bringing up there.
Well, I like to make the analogy, just like you talked about the caveman. So generations ago, our ancestors. I like to talk about, if we can eat like they ate, we'd probably be a lot better off. Basically eat real food that they foraged. So, animal products and some things that are grown in the ground. None of this packaged stuff, right? And I think exercise goes the same way, just like what you're talking about. They didn't go to the gym for a half hour. They didn't go to the gym for 45 minutes. They didn't have barbells and dumbbells and plates and kettlebells. What did they do? They moved all day long, from the time the sun was up, to prepare food, to hunt. And during the hunt, what did they do during the hunt? So they tracked an animal for a long time. So they moved for multiple hours. And then what did they do? They got close to the animal and they had to sprint. So there's the HIIT training right there. So for 30 seconds, a minute, they had to go really, really hard until they killed the animal. And you could use the analogy of fishing too. And if anybody's ever fished, especially, when you do catch the fish, you are going intense for a while. And then what did they do? Then when they caught the animal, they had to lift it. If it was a deer or elk, and they had to carry it out. Well, there's a strength training. So if we can try to mimic that as close as possible, I think we'd be better off. Move all day, lift heavy things sometimes, and sprint sometimes. That's really what we need to do as humans to thrive.
Yeah. And, and it's neat too is, I always think about the caveman or those early people where it wasn't as much of the artificial light and the inside things. Is I find working with a lot of clients over the years is if we can get them to do, say a 5 to 10 minute walk. Again, it doesn't have to be crazy, but 5 to 10 minutes in the morning, like when they wake up, there, you get that early morning sunlight exposure. And then if they're able to do, even just 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the day, for a lot of people, yeah, it helps their, health, their cardiovascular. But I think as much as anything, I find stress levels in people that I work with go down because it's kind of like when they're walking, they get that sunlight. It helps with their sleep cycles, but it also kind of helps them, think about the day ahead a little bit. And then at the end of the day, I find most clients, they're like, I thought when you said, hey, I just schedule in a 5-minute walk at the end of my workday, I thought it was a little bit weird. Like, hey, this isn't going to help. But they're like, we found just doing that 5-minute walk kind of helped our brains transition from work mode to rest and recovery mode. and it doesn't take a long thing, but just having something to kind of transition. And we know if we can lower stress levels, that again is going to improve our overall health and wellness.
Well, what all case mortality is what we were talking about at the conference. And you hit on a good point, because we know we've talked about it on the show with you about how food causes inflammation, but you hit on a great point, Shawn, that stress levels in our lives are really important, because that really trumps a lot. If you're stressed, you don't sleep well. If you're stressed, you're not thinking as well on the job or at home. And so just that time is so important just for your brain to clear out and shift, like you said, into, okay, now I'm home. Now it's important for what? To let go of what's at work and then focus on your family or, other things at home. And that's a really good point. But I think as a culture, we become really focused. And Shawn and I have heard even athletes, like they get pigeonholed into just this one thing. And we've been talking about this morning, that just walking is a super easy event for most people to start out with, but it does more than just that. It's calming, and I love that, because we're always reaching for what's that magic bullet out there that somebody's going to sell me some pill to take, but really it's action.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you're saying about the stress and recovery, Shawn. Like the walk starts the recovery process, because let's face it, our bodies are created to have stress, and the stress should initiate a response. So, exercise, HIIT training, endurance training is a stressor on our body, and or our daily lives, whether it be work, whether it be mental, whether it be physical, are stressors that I think our body needs. I mean, we're designed to actually, to respond to stress. But I like what you said, Shawn, is the 5-minute walk before and after is what starts the recovery process, because recovery is how we get stronger during those stressful events, not during the event, but when we recover, we get stronger.
Mm-hmm. And one really cool way that you can increase the intensity of walking. So I always think about people who have, they have knee pain, hip pain, some sort of, chronic condition. What I have found effective is, either a bike, but going back to the walking concept, is if we want to increase that intensity without putting more load on the joints, is simply switching from breathing through our mouth as we're doing that to breathing through our nose. By focus on breathing through your nose as you're walking, for a lot of people, that all of a sudden adds that new stressor to them, where you're going to see that increase in, fitness levels without necessarily putting more stress on their joints and bones. So that's kind of that nice, easy transition. You can always increase your walking speed as well, but having those little things there to kind of make it novel and new, to keep it a little bit more exciting, can be, kind of fun add-ins as well.
So I'm going to share here a link that we learned from our conference about how to estimate your VO2 max. And it's basically, it's called So if you go to the website, worldfitnesslevel.org, it will show you this test. And basically what this test does is I don't know, have you seen a test like this before, Shawn?
I've seen a running test for VO2, and I've also seen one on one of those ergometers, but this is a new one for me. I would like to see more. Yeah,
and so I'm going to just kind of go overview a little bit. It's definitely an estimate. So it uses your age, it uses your resting heart rate, it uses it asks you your activity level, so you have to be honest about these things. And then it asks you your height and your body weight, and then there's a few other factors in there too. I can't remember what, but something that's very easy to answer. And then it estimates your VO2 max. Now, I will tell you one of the calculations it's doing is it's using your BMI. And you and I know that BMI is not necessarily accurate. Mm-hmm. So it underestimated my VO2 max, probably because it looked like I was maybe obese because of my height and weight. Either way, I think any way you test your VO2 max, whether it be this whether it be a Apple Watch, whether it be a Garmin watch or bike computer, or whether it be an actual VO2 test, VO2 Max test. I think what's important, like with anything, Shawn, when you're measuring body fat, when you're measuring weight, stick with one device and stay with that device and see how you can move the needle, right?
Mm-hmm. And exactly, because I always tell people, as long as you're using the same device, let's say, hey, this might be underestimating someone's true VO2 by whatever, 10 units or whatever. Well, if you're using the same device, you're still going to see changes. And that's the big thing for most people, having those data points where it's like, okay, we know this is going to be 10 short, but it's going to be 10 short every time. So building off what you're saying, I like that approach and making things simple.
Yeah, it was, I'm glad that we're seeing more, as much as as much as technology has really kind of messed up our lives in a lot of ways, it's made some things convenient too. And when I like the how we're seeing the push towards being able to monitor more of your health data easier. Now, I think what we need to do is we just need to, educate people about the importance of monitoring and trying to improve.
And the fun thing too is now, building off the advantage of the devices, there's so many fun things you can do with like a gamification standpoint. I have found for behavior change for people, this is going to sound really dumb, but just having a watch that, beep or not beeps, but like vibrates every 2 hours. Like, oh yeah, I just want to move around, or like, this is going to sound dumb, but if I'm at the end of the day and I'm like, oh, I'm 50, 100 steps, whatever, short of the next 1,000, even though I know it's whatever, I'll still get up and move around.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think one of the things that, first of all, I'm so excited that we are talking about this at a conference where, healthcare providers are at, but I don't think this is across the board. But if we got to a point where we could just be honest that, we do need to do those movements and just prescribe that to your clients or your patients, I think that is a big eye opener. But like you said, that's so simple. It's not hard. It's so accessible, so easy to incorporate. It's not like we have to do something major. And I think that's what a lot of times people just get overwhelmed. Don't you think, Shawn, that they're like, I can't do this diet and this exercise and this, it just goes on and on and on. And they're just like, I'm done.
Oh my gosh, that was awesome how you put it. I absolutely loved it. I think about working with people for the last, 20 years, fresh out of school, all excited, Sean Casey. I used to make super complex programs. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's I'm like, this is going to be awesome. My compliance rate was like me. And so that's what I had to do, was dial it back and, make it simpler. And it's so interesting. So people, come up and, they'll do a consult with me, and the cost will be, whatever it is. And I'll give them something really, really simple. And they're like, oh, this is it. I thought there'd be more than this. I'm like, no, actually, if I can make it simpler for you, we can have greater long-term on your, your journey. And so, simple, easy to apply things always work best, and being able to do that, because I am like guilty as charged, way too complex things. Here's 20 things at once. And that was the early learning mistakes within my career. And it's interesting too. I was just kind of thinking about, what you were saying in terms of easy to apply things and how it's across for like health and wellness, and with healthcare practitioners. I think that's going to be one of the big changes that I love that is seen as going. And even too, and this is why I always tell coaches who are doing like maybe training with athletes, maybe they're a power lifter or they're whatever there is. And I think you mentioned, kind of you sometimes get stuck in kind of those pigeonholes. Is I always have to remind people, whether you're a power lifter or whoever, having a baseline level of cardiovascular fitness is going to have huge benefits across the board. I mean, there's a lot of people who can, lift really, really heavy weights, but from an overall health and wellness standpoint, they're running in the red. And so being able to incorporate those across the spectrum is so impactful.
Well, and I mean, as a lot of high caliber athletes, they do get pigeonholed, whether it be a sprinter, an Olympic sprinter, whether it be a power lifter or a bodybuilder or a Tour de France rider. Mm-hmm. I mean, by design, they do get pigeonholed, and they do have to concentrate on certain things, to excel at their sport. But like you say, the best ones overall will at least have a little bit of everything and a lot of something. Like the powerlifter example, for instance. If that powerlifter has better VO2 max, he can recover better between lifts and essentially lift more. Those are just facts. He can recover faster, right, and lift more later. I mean, those are just facts. So, that is why cardio is important in every sport. And on the flip side, strength is also. I mean, Tour de France riders need to have gym time, or they can get injured more. But it also helps their overall fitness and power if they have strength training.
No, absolutely. And, and going back to the example, I know a lot of power lifters, they struggle with sleeping. They're waking up multiple times a night. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see such, better recovery when they have that baseline fitness is they're sleeping more consistently throughout the night. And I always tell people there's nothing more anabolic than a good night of sleep, And so
that's right. and on the flip side, there's nothing more catabolic than having insomnia. I mean, your body is just literally eating itself away because you're not recovering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really agree with that statement. That also was one of the topics we had during this conference is how important sleep is. And Shawn and I, we talk about that all the time. But the point that you made, Shawn, is that is when our tissue's rebuilding and repairing. And if that doesn't happen, then that sets us up for injury. It also sets us up for chronic illnesses, because that's the time that our body says, hey, I'm going to remove this and fix this and rebuild this and make this better. And if that doesn't happen, I think you set yourself up for some long-term problems. I mean, Shawn and I have talked about this too. Like, why are there certain groups of athletes that die early? Like, why? Where is that coming in? And I think recovery could be the place, but we're all guilty of that in the society because of the phones, right? Or computers, or, so discounting sleep is a big problem. We really have to focus on that. I agree.
And talking about those high caliber athletes, and you can speak to this because you trained some of them, Shawn. You were talking about when you first got out of school, how you make these complicated programs. And when I first started, when I first hired a mountain bike racing coach, I was kind of expecting the same, and he'd been doing it for a while, and he was a champion racer in his own right. So he knew what it took to be at the next level. And I was expecting this complicated program. and I mean, it took me a few years to understand, what he was doing, even though he was telling me what he was doing. And he shared some videos with me. An educational video on, there was some kind of high caliber bike racer that did a little TED talk on training. And at the Tour de France level, 80% of their training is done in zone 1 or zone 2. So fairly boring stuff. Nothing super exciting. Basically, the important thing is, and we've kind of hit on it without saying it, is do something and do it consistently. Yeah. When you look at any, Steph Curry, probably the best 3-point shooter ever. What does he do? He shoots a lot of 3-pointers in practice. That's what he does over and over and over again. Nothing fancy, just practices shooting 3-pointers. And I think that's really, overall what we need to get the best results is just be consistent about it. So that 5-minute daily walk, do it every day, and then maybe add another 5 minutes, and just do it every day, and you will get results.
Mm-hmm. I always tell people, even when I'm, doing programs or whatever it is I would rather have somebody follow, I should back up with. So they always talk about like the 80-20 rule, right? Like 80% of your results are coming from 20% of what you're doing. I would rather simplify things to only that 20% that takes 10, 20, whatever that minutes is. I'd rather have you do that 100% of the time as opposed to doing a full program 5% of the time. Like if we can just get consistent at whatever those biggest rocks are, the gains in health and wellness and performance and whatever your goals are can be so outstanding from a consistency standpoint. So I love how you guys both preach that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as we wind this podcast up, Shawn, tell us what you have a passion for.
My greatest passion is helping people perform at their best of whatever their goals are. If their goals are, hey, I want to be able to keep up with my kids, my grandkids, well, heck, we're going to rock that out. If your goal is I want to do whatever in the sporting world, we're going to rock that out. So the more that we can do to help people perform at their best along their performance journey is my greatest passion.
I'm streaming your website here. Tell us about that, Shawn.
All right. So for people who want to work with me, Case Performance, that is a blend of both some, more intense science articles as well as general health and wellness information. I do both nutrition consultations with people who are looking for help on the training side of things. You'll able to reach me through there.
Awesome. Well, as always, it's such a pleasure to have you on. We could talk about so many different subjects in just hours. So you're going to be back on. So I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you guys, both you, Shawn, as well as Janet. You guys are doing great things. I follow you on your social media handles. I always get inspired because you talk about simple things that you can do, whether on the road, in daily life, to improve health and wellness. So I just want to thank you for everything that you guys do.
You're welcome. And I did just let you know, there was a post last night I did about our grocery shopping, a little bit of grocery shopping that we did. And the topic of price, of course, came up. And I tagged you in it. So you'll have to go
I'll
in
be
there
jumping on that.
Yeah, you'll have to go in there and respond, because I always think of you with those things, because you're good at responding to those things. So.
Yep, I will definitely jump on. And to build on that point, anyone who I'm usually really quick in back to messages on Facebook, on social media. So feel free to friend me on any of those locations. I always enjoy a good conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Shawn. And thank you, listeners and viewers, to tune in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Monday to our regularly scheduled podcast, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.